Welcome back to Airgun Academy. For the past few episodes, we've been talking about scope mounts. We went over some basics, and then we covered the 3/8 inch or 11mm mount, the Weaver mount, and the Picatinny rail type mount in detail. We still have some more ground to cover with regard to scope mounts. For this episode, we'll take a look at scope stop systems. Come on, let's dive right in. When a spring piston airgun fires, it generates vibration and sharp recoil. Scope stops suppress this vibration and recoil and prevent scope mounts from moving on the rifle. We're going to cover several types of scope stop systems today, starting with the vertical scope stop pin. The vertical scope stop pin can be used with both one-piece and two-piece mounts. On a one-piece, the scope stop pin is positioned at the rear of the scope mount. On a two-piece, the scope stop pin extends below the base and the rear scope mount. The pin is designed to fit inside the vertical holes cut into the top of the spring tube on certain airgun models, like the TX200. Just select one of the three holes and insert the pin. When the mount is clamped to the 11mm dovetail, the pin prevents it from moving. Be sure to insert the pin so that it touches the back of the hole, because the mount will try to move toward the rear of the gun. The vertical scope stop pin is a great way to stop scope mounts from moving. You'll definitely want to give them a try and see the results for yourself. Now, let's take a look at an adapter that gives you a Weaver type scope base. This Weaver base is designed to clamp onto a standard 11mm scope rail base. It allows you to mount Weaver style rings to a rifle that doesn't have a Weaver base. This base has a vertical scope stop pin built into its rear. So, once again, you must have vertical scope stop holes on top of your airgun. In 2010, the Crosman Corporation brought out its Benjamin Trail Series air rifles with Weaver bases permanently built into their spring tubes. All you have to do for these rifles is select Weaver rings for your scope. They attach straight to the rifle with no extra fuss. This is so much easier than mounting adapters, and we hope to see more guns with this kind of base in the future. What about airguns that don't have vertical scope stop holes or Weaver bases? Well, there is a type of scope stop that comes already attached to the air rifle. A special scope stop plate is attached directly to the top of the spring tube at the rear of the 11mm dovetail. Simply butt the rear scope mount against the plate when you install the mounts, and your scope will be locked down tight. This Tech Force rifle has a plate at the rear of the 11mm dovetail grooves to stop the rear scope mount from moving. And this isn't the only airgun to use this type of scope stop system. In fact, many airguns use this kind of system for their scope stops. Next up is a special type of base that's specifically made for RWS Diana air rifles. We're talking about a UTG brand base that slips over the base that's already on RWS Diana air rifles. It butts against the front of the fixed base on the rifle, stopping your scope's tendency to move backward. On top of this base, you'll find Weaver cross slots for Weaver mounts. This base is made for specific models, and it solves barrel droop, which is an issue that many RWS Diana air rifles have. What exactly is barrel droop? Because of how it relates to other in-depth topics, I won't address barrel droop right now, but don't worry, we'll be covering that topic soon in upcoming episodes. Now, many new shooters incorrectly assume that if they clamp any scope mount on the rifle, the scope won't move, but that's not the case. They learn after taking many shots why scope stops are so important. But some air rifles have absolutely no provisions for a scope stop of any kind. What can you do when you have to scope one of these? That brings us to our next scope stop system. Let's take a look at a special kind of scope mount that really does hold your scope using clamping pressure only. This one-piece scope mount features 1-inch rings. It fits on a 3/8 inch or 11mm dovetail. 6 clamping screws on the base provide maximum gripping pressure. Also, the mount is made from tough aluminum, so it won't mar the finish on your steel airgun spring tube. The name of the company that makes this type of clamping scope mount is BKL Technologies. They make many styles and heights, as well as 1-inch and 30mm ring sizes, so you should be able to find something that works for you. The final type of scope stop that you should know about is the horizontal scope stop groove. First off, let me just tell you that the horizontal scope stop groove is not used on current airgun models, but I wanted to bring it up so you're aware that this type of scope stop does exist. The horizontal scope stop groove was prevalent on fine Verkbau sporting spring rifles, certain Webley spring rifles, and other European spring rifles made during the decades before the 21st century. As you can imagine, there are still plenty of airguns in service that have this system. Mounts for these rifles need 1 or more horizontal crosspins to engage these grooves. But because of the low usage of this kind of scope stop system, there aren't a lot of scope mounts with the necessary crosspin. We've gone over quite a few scope stop systems in this episode. Keeping track of all of them can be confusing until you learn which airguns to use with which systems. Some are more specific than others, and as I mentioned, it's not as simple as simply clamping any scope mount on any airgun. Let's take another quick look at the scope stop systems we covered in this episode. The first scope stop system we covered was the vertical scope stop pin. It can be used with both 1- and 2-piece scope mounts, and it's designed to fit inside the vertical hole in the top of certain airgun spring tubes, like the TX200. Next, we talked about Weaver base adapters, which allows you to mount Weaver-style rings to rifles that don't have a Weaver base. Benjamin Trail Series air rifles come with Weaver bases permanently built into their spring tubes. Next, we talked about scope stops that are already attached to air rifles. For this system, a scope stop plate is attached to the top of the spring tube at the rear of the 11mm dovetail. When you install mounts, the rear scope mount butts against the plate. The fourth scope stop system is the UTG brand base that slips over the base that's already on RWS Diana air rifles. It solves the common RWS Diana issue of barrel droop, which is something we'll be covering in another episode. Next, we went over mounts that use clamping pressure only. BKL Technologies makes many styles and heights of these mounts. The last scope stop system we went over is the horizontal scope stop groove, which isn't used on current airguns. However, they were common with European airguns made just before the 21st century. There are still a lot of airguns out there that use horizontal scope stop grooves, so it's important that you're aware of this system. As you can see, the subject of scope stops is both expansive and extremely detailed. If you want to get the best performance from your gun, you need to learn the importance of each of these details and how they relate to your situation. Check out the line of scope stop systems and scope mounts on Pyramyd Air's website. And don't forget to ask any questions you might have regarding the best scope stop system or scope mount for your airgun. Thanks for watching Airgun Academy. Stay tuned for another great lesson from Pyramyd Air.